Welcome to Gardening in the Mountains, Hydrangea Happiness. My name is Allison Arnold. I'm the consumer horticulture agent for Cooperative Extension in Buncombe County, and I'll be your host today. Our speaker today is Nancy Duffy. Nancy is the owner of Muddy Boots Incorporated and has been creating beautiful, thoughtful gardens across Western North Carolina and beyond for more than 23 years. She's known for designing gardens that feel at home in their surroundings and become places in which her clients truly love to live. Her passion for gardens goes well beyond design. She journals about them, captures their beauty through sketching and painting, and in her spare time, she tends her own garden in South Asheville, helped along by her crew of dogs and cats. We're delighted to welcome Nancy today as she shares her knowledge on the care and culture of one of our favorite and sometimes confusing group of plants, beautiful hydrangeas. So welcome, Nancy. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me, Allison. I've titled this talk Hydrangea Happiness because hydrangeas can offer so much happiness to the gardener, but it's a plant that can confuse and confound us at times. I'm hoping that we'll end this talk with an understanding of how to be happy with your hydrangeas. I'm going to talk today about 4 primary species that we can grow in Western North Carolina. I'm going to look at 4 species in depth, and then I've got a few other more obscure hydrangeas to share with you. And of course, being a designer, I'm going to talk about designing with hydrangeas. So the 4 species are Bigleaf hydrangea, that's Hydrangea macrophylla, Oakleaf hydrangea, which is quercifolia, Panicle hydrangea, paniculata, and smooth hydrangea, which is native to the mountains, and it's Hydrangea arborescens. I'll start with bigleaf hydrangea, the one that we all know and hopefully love that can be pink or blue, or really anything in between. I've seen pink, blue, and purple on the same plant. This is a plant that's native to China and Japan. It blooms in early summer, and some of the bigleaf hydrangeas repeat their flower, which is an advantage in some seasons. It's typically about a 5 by 5 foot shrub, but it can get larger in temperate climates. On the West Coast, up in Oregon, they get much larger. This hydrangea blooms on old wood, and we'll talk about that. But some of them also bloom on new wood. It's hardy in zone 6, but as we all know, up here in the mountains, we get late frost just about every year, and that can damage the flower production for any growing season. So the flower types, there are 2 for bigleaf hydrangea. One is a lace cap and one is a mop head, sometimes called hortensia. You might see that more in the forest trade, calling them hortensia. These are 2 selections. There are so many to choose from, and more come out every year. These are 2 really pretty ones. So what makes this hydrangea blue or pink or purple? It really depends on the amount of aluminum that is available to the plant. We all think of pH as controlling flower color, but pH actually controls the availability of aluminum that the plant can take up. In a more acid soil, where the pH is less than 7, there's more aluminum available in the soil, so you get bluer flowers. In alkaline soil, where the pH is greater than 7, aluminum becomes insoluble and you get a pinker flower. When I'm planting, if I want a blue hydrangea, I'll add aluminum sulfate at the time of planting. You can buy it in a bag and just add it to your backfill. In my experience, year after year, I get blue hydrangeas. If it starts to turn pink on you, you can do a soil drench of aluminum sulfate when the bud is breaking, and then do it every couple of weeks. But typically, if you put aluminum sulfate in the backfill when you're planting, you're going to have blue flowers. In the mountains, we are typically pretty acidic. So that does it for my hydrangeas. Bigleaf hydrangeas like moderate temperatures. They like high humidity. They do really well in coastal areas. They like consistently moist, well-drained soil, which is what many plants like. Typically, they like protection from late afternoon sun. They do pretty well in part sun, and I have them blooming in as little as 3 hours of sun a day. So I would cite them definitely with afternoon shade. They are salt tolerant, which is not an issue up here. I avoid overhead watering because the leaves tend to get pretty ratty looking and spotty with fungal diseases. It doesn't really harm the plant, but it doesn't look great. So if you're going to water your hydrangeas, water at the base. One of the questions that I get frequently is, why aren't my hydrangeas blooming? It has to do with where the buds are on the plant and when they set their buds. Hydrangea macrophylla blooms on old wood. So that means that the buds set the summer before the next spring. Some of the newer macrophyllas also bloom on new wood, which is an advantage, especially to us up here. The macrophylla plant has a terminal flower bud at the end of the stem and fully developed floral buds along the stem. So it's got apical dominance, which means that terminal flower bud controls what blooms the rest of the shoot. If the top bud dies, if it's killed by cold, then the lower flower buds along the stem are released for growth. That affects the plant both from late cold and also from pruning. So if you're pruning a bigleaf hydrangea, you want to look for that terminal bud and see if it's viable. If it's viable, that means we probably didn't have a damaging late frost and it set buds from the last year. If the plant is congested, you can take out a third of the oldest canes at the base of the plant. Leaves can really build up in the base of the plant, and over time it can become congested. What I do with my bigleaf hydrangeas is just thin them out once a year. If that bud at the top of the stem is killed by a late cold, then look along the stem to see if there are other buds coming along that look plump, shiny green, brown. They look viable. And when you squeeze them, they're not papery. You can tip off that top bud, the portion of the stem that looks dead, and then you'll probably get flowers emerging along the lower part of the stem. If there are no viable buds on that stem, then you can take that stem off completely at the base of the plant. You really have to get to know what those buds look like so you can identify, okay, that late frost did the top one in. I'm just going to take the top of the stem off and go from there. The next thing is, what does the plant look like after it's flowered? You get your beautiful flowers in June, and then they turn papery and brown. If you want to get rid of those, be aware that it's already probably starting to set buds for next season. You just need to tip off those spent flowers right behind the flowering stem. Also, if you have a rebloomer, you want to think about preserving any bloom that's going to come along later in the season. So right behind the spent flower head is where to tip that off. I talked a little bit about reflowering bigleaf hydrangeas, and Nico Blue is a really old selection. It's been around for, I don't even know how long, but a long, long time. It is a favorite because it was one of the first reblooming bigleaf hydrangeas available on the market. You will get sporadic rebloom with Nico Blue after the first flush. The improved version of that is Endless Summer. And here you can see it both pink and blue. The blue is in acidic soil and the pink is in alkaline soil. This plant is widely available in commerce, and they have a million different selections of it now. But good old Endless Summer, the original introduction, is just a great performer. I really love this plant. My experience has been that I usually get flowers, maybe sparse in a really bad late frost, but you'll almost always see some blue or pink flowers with Endless Summer. There are a variety of cultivars and selections that are really delicate and beautiful. This one is white. The bracts of the flower head are the white part, and that pale blue is the actual flower. That's just tipped blue. There are so many variations on this. I just thought I'd show you a few. This is Madame Emile Muller, a French one. This one is called Lady in Red, and not only is the flower red, but the stem and leaf has a reddish hue to it. This is a variegated bigleaf hydrangea. It's got a lace cap flower, and the flower is not that showy, but the foliage is nice. Called Light of Day. My experience has been that this is kind of a fussy plant, and I'm sure that it's due to the variegation, because variegated plants often are not quite as strong as straight species or unvariegated plants. So it's kind of a fussy plant, needs more water, needs good siding, but it can add brightness to a shady garden from the leaf as well as the flower. So that's the first species.
Thank you, Nancy. We had a couple of questions. You were talking about changing the color of the flowers. Is there a foliar spray that will work for changing color?
I think it really has to do with the root system, unless you know of something that I don't, Allison. Typically, it's what the plant draws up from the root.
Because our soils are acid, typically they tend to lean towards blue. What do you recommend if you want it red?
Well, pink, not red, probably lime.
Is there a macrophylla that works well in large pots? Do hydrangeas work in containers?
They absolutely do. And I've had hydrangeas grow in big pots. I would have a pot that is frost proof, so you can leave it outside, and was 24 to 30 inches at the opening. So you get a good root system going and protection in the winter so the roots don't freeze.
Is there any reason why hydrangea would not bloom for 3 to 4 years? Somebody's put in the chat box that they've not pruned it at all.
Number one, I would check how much light it's getting. They do actually bloom well with a lot of shade, but you would need 3 to 4 hours of direct sunlight to get a good flower show. So that's the first thing. Is it sited with enough sun? The next thing to examine is your pruning technique. Are you pruning the flowers off? A lot of people do that by accident, or the late frost. Those are the three culprits.
They could be in a site that gets really harsh frost. It's not as protected as maybe another. One more. Is
Yep.
the lady in red for alkaline or acidic soil? Now, this is interesting because I have a lady in red, but it's blue. And I think that's just because of the soil pH.
I'm sure it's because of the soil pH. And if you really want to grow a lady in red, I would control the soil by planting it in a pot. And then you have complete control over the soil that it's growing in. Because we do tend towards acidic soils up here. The next species we're going to look at is Oakleaf hydrangea, Hydrangea quercifolia. And this is one of my favorites. It's not native to the mountains, but it is native to the southeastern US, and it grows in kind of boggy soils. Natively grows in Mississippi, Alabama, those kinds of places, but it's a great plant for us in the mountains. It has an early summer bloom, which turns kind of a dusky pink, and a lot of people love it for that. It's a big plant. It really can get 10 by 15 easily. And the other thing, I've got all four of these hydrangeas in my garden, but this one in particular seeds around like mad. Early on, I would dig seedlings and put them in other places, but eventually I got so many seedlings that I just started yanking them out. I wouldn't say it's weedy, but it does spread around. So free plants when you're growing Oakleaf hydrangea. The plants layer, or they will send out roots where the branches touch the soil. So it makes a big mass of a shrub. This hydrangea blooms on old wood. So it's setting bud in the summer for the next season's flower show. And this plant will bloom in dense shade. It's really versatile, sun or shade, actually. This is one hydrangea that, in my opinion, looks good all year. It's got something to offer the gardener. It's got the white flower that turns pink. It's got really nice wine red fall color. And then the stems are peeling bark. And I think that also contributes to texture in the winter garden. With adequate moisture, you can grow it in full sun, but I have it in full shade and it blooms like a champ. You really want to prune by the end of July if you're going to reduce the size or shape it for any reason. So it does have a chance to set buds for the following year. If you leave those papery flower panicles on the plant for winter interest, which I usually do, just carefully tip prune right behind that flower in early spring so you're not cutting off any flowers for the coming spring season. This is a picture of Alice, and this was interestingly selected at the same time another Oakleaf hydrangea was selected for Alice and Arnold by Michael Durr down at the University of Georgia. Alice and Allison are big plants. I have Alice in my garden, and it is a reseeder. I have it growing under an oak tree, and it has made a huge mass under this oak tree, and it's really beautiful. Flowers every year. A newer introduction is called Ruby Slippers. I use this in my design work a lot because it's a much more moderate plant in terms of mature size, has a really nice flower set. and it gets about 5 or 6 feet high and wide. It's commonly available, and it's a more refined Oakleaf hydrangea and lovely in the garden. I use it a lot. This is a favorite. It's called Snowflake. It's a big plant, but it has a double flower, and it's really lovely in bloom. It looks typical in all its other growing parts, typical size, big plant, but it's got this beautiful, delicate flower raceme. This one came out, I don't know, 15 years ago, and it's a dwarf. This is actually in my garden, and it's 3 different plants growing together. It's a small plant, and the flower is not that exciting, but I do love the chartreuse color of the leaf for a shady spot. And it's a trooper. It's not quite as easy to find these days, but if you can find it, it's worth having in a shady garden. Oakleaf hydrangea.
I think one of the things with oak leaves is that this is one of those that people plant without really understanding how big, at least the straight species can get, and some of the varieties. There's a question about how to control size.
When you're pruning a plant like oakleaf hydrangea, it looks best in its natural form. So if you're going to prune it for size, prune it at the base of the plant. If you've got a wild hair coming out in one direction, take that stem all the way down to the base of the plant and control the size like that. If you're going to reduce the height of it, I think that's fine to do. It just does not look good as a sheared plant. This is a native plant. You want it to look natural in your garden. So work the width of the plant by pruning at the base and judiciously top prune, head into the plant, but don't shear it. And always, if you're going to take anything off the top of a branch, do it by the end of July or you'll be cutting your flowers off.
If you have a really leggy oak leaf hydrangea, can it be pruned to fill out? And if so, when would you get on top of that?
Yeah, you can. If you're going to prune it hard, like rejuvenate prune an oakleaf hydrangea, I would probably do that in the springtime so it has a full growing season to recover. However, you will be cutting your flower show off that. So just know that you won't have the blooms that year. So you're sacrificing one season's flowers to rejuvenate the plant.
Do you have an idea of when the best time to take cuttings would be for propagation?
I don't. I'm not a propagator.
I did a little looking on that, and it was talking about late spring, early summer when you've got soft to semi hardwood from non flowering stems. And that's probably the best guidance I can give. I'm
Yeah.
not a propagator either. Okay, one more. Somebody has ruby slippers that's barely pink.
Barely pink. I'm going to say it might be the amount of sun it gets. The flower will start as white and then turn that dusky pink. With more sun, that pinky color gets deeper. So I would ask how many hours of direct sun it's getting. The next hydrangea I'm going to talk about is Panicle hydrangea, Hydrangea paniculata. This is another great big shrub. People are always surprised by how big this plant gets. It is an Asian species. It blooms in midsummer. It has a white flower that fades to a pinky color. And as I said, big. The straight species can get 15 feet tall and 12 feet wide. So site with care. It blooms on new wood. So this is a no-brainer hydrangea. And it really is all about the flower. There isn't anything else terribly attractive about the plant. The flower is the show for this plant. And it is often trained as a standard or made into a tree form. If it's allowed to get really large, you can prune it up to look like a small tree. It really wants to be in full sun to do its best flowering. I'd say average water up here in the mountains. We get quite a bit of rain most years, and that's adequate. This one you can prune like mad. So you can prune for shape and size in late winter, early spring, and then it'll start growing and it will always bloom as long as it gets enough sun. This really can be hard pruned. I have a lot of these that I do that with, and I've never had a year without flowers. Here's an example of that. This is my garden. The picture on the left, you can see the woody stems right in front of the boxwood hedge. This is a plant called tardiva, and it is one of the really big panicle hydrangeas. I prune it to about 2.5 to 3 feet every year. The picture on the right is the summer show. It does that every single year. Probably 6 to 8 hours of direct sun. I get that flower show. So it really is a no-brainer in terms of ensuring your flower every year. One of the oldest panicle hydrangeas is the PG, and you'll often see this growing as a tree form or a standard, like it's shown in this picture. That just means they take all the lower branches off, they train it to a single stem or multi-stem small tree. The one that everybody knows and many people love to hate is limelight and little lime. Limelight, I get a lot of people saying it's so big. Well, it is truly a big plant, but little lime offers us a smaller version of that. Here it's shown at maybe 2.5 feet, but I would say you can expect 3 or 4 feet out of a little lime. Limelight will get 8 feet easy. But again, you can control the size of these plants by hard pruning every single year. Most panicle hydrangeas are white or greeny white, but there are two selections that have been developed that have this pinky bloom. Pinky Winky is a smaller version of a pink panicle hydrangea. That's on the left. On the right is vanilla strawberry, which a lot of people really love. This doesn't have anything to do with the pH of the soil. This plant just does this, regardless of soil pH. Here's Tardiva. This is the one that I grow in my garden that I showed the picture of. They call it Tardiva, I think, because it's tardy, which means that it blooms later. This really is a late summer bloomer. And I love it for that because when a lot of things are finishing, this one really comes into its own and gives you this beautiful, big, long panicle of white flowers.
You may have mentioned this, but when is the best time to hard prune a panicle hydrangea?
I usually do it in late February, early March, right before the growing season begins.
If you hard prune each year, will it still grow really large in the summer?
I'm going to go back to a picture that I showed. So this is a picture of a panicle hydrangea that I prune every single year. I would consider this hard pruning, 2.5 to 3 feet. You can see the flower in the right-hand picture is probably 6 or 8 feet tall. It will do that in the growing season.
How long have those plants been in the ground?
They might have been in the ground for 6 or 8 years when I took this picture. I've still got these same plants in the ground, and this has been another 10 years. They're still blooming like this. However, my garden gets shadier and shadier every year because the canopy gets bigger and bigger every year. So my bloom has gotten a little sparser, but it still does pretty good.
Interesting, because somebody said if I hard prune, the stems are fairly floppy. And if I prune to only 3 feet, would the stems be more upright? They only get 5 hours of sun.
Yes, I would say leave some of that woody stem for sure. So if you pruned it somewhere between 2 and 3 feet, it will be less floppy because you'll have that hardwood structure at the base of the plant. The other thing that I'll say about that is the plant that I've used in that application is Tardiva, and that is a very upright growing plant. So if you treated a limelight like that, it would probably be a little floppier. That particular selection is a very vertical plant. I think the flower head on panicle hydrangea like limelight is denser, and so it's probably heavier.
The other thing is this is shrubbed to the ground. You've got branches to the ground. It's not a standard. Sometimes you see that where you've got one to several stems and then the growth starts. So it depends on your form, but this is always so lovely when it goes to the ground like that.
All right, the last species that I'm going to talk about is our native Hydrangea arborescens, smooth hydrangea. You'll see this grown in the woods. It's diminutive, it is delicate, and it's not a very showy plant, the straight species, when it's growing in the woods. However, it can be quite showy in the garden. It is native to the eastern and midwestern United States. It blooms about midsummer, late June. I'm starting to see the flowers in my garden. It's about 5 by 5. It's not a big shrub. It blooms on new wood. So this is a plant that you can't really make pruning mistakes with. It will bloom lightly in dense shade, but with some additional sun, 3 or 4 hours, you'll get a pretty good flower show. I would recommend afternoon shade The late afternoon sun is the harshest. So if you can give it some late afternoon shade, it does a little better. The more sun it's in, the more water it needs. If you're going to plant it in full sun, which I've done, just be prepared to give it some water when we're not getting an inch of rain a week. This one can really be pruned 8 to 10 inches in late winter. That stem will come up and flower every year if it's sited in enough sun. These two selections are very showy in flower. Annabelle on the left is an old selection. It was found in some woman's garden and it has been propagated and planted all over. I love this plant. The one on the right is called Incredible, and it's a newer selection with this great big flower head. So the thing with Annabelle is that it's real floppy. Those great big flower heads, as soon as we get a hard rain, they just flop over and lay on the ground. Supposedly, Incredible has a stronger stem. I have grown both side by side, and Incredible might offer a little more in terms of more upright stems after a hard rain, but it'll flop over too. So what I do typically is plant something in front of a mop head or a great big ball hydrangea for it to lean on. I'll show you some pictures of that. This selection is called Hayes Starburst, and it is just one of the most beautiful flowering shrubs I've ever seen. It's just a personal favorite. It is an arborescens that has fertile flowers in the center and these little bursts of bracts. They're infertile and they pop out around the fertile flowers in the center. It's a small plant. It might get 3 feet tall. It definitely needs afternoon protection from the sun. It's diminutive. The flower is lovely. It's easy to grow. It just needs some afternoon shade. It's not that readily available, but I will tell you where to get it at the end of the program. I've seen this growing in captures in a private garden in a huge sweep, and it really is a breathtaking plant. Dr. Tom Rainey at the NC State Mountain Horticultural Crop Research Station developed a series called Invincible, and it was the attempt to get a pink flowering hydrangea arborescens. There are several selections that have been released since the first one. It's this medium pink flower, and I think it's a pretty popular plant. I think it's the subsequent releases from the first one, Invincible Spirit 2, the literature says strong stems, reliably pink flower. This one won't turn blue. It will only turn pink. This is another hydrangea arborescens that I love, and it's a much bigger plant. It's probably 6 by 6, and it's called Haas Halo. It has fertile flowers on the interior and sterile flowers and bracts on the outside. It has this really pretty satellite look to it. It is hard to find. I have tried to use it in a lot of garden designs and have had trouble finding it. But if you can find it, it is a worthwhile plant to grow. It's really a lovely plant. Natural subspecies of Hydrangea arborescens is radiata, and the characteristic that makes it different is the back of the leaf is white. It's a subtle thing. It has a typical kind of ball flower. It's not a huge ball. But when the wind blows and the plant's leaves flutter, you get the back of the leaf kind of shimmering with the back being white. It's an interesting plant if you can find it. This one is called Samantha. Questions about smooth hydrangea. I love how green the flowers start out. This is an early flower developing in my garden.
We didn't have any about arborescence. I'm going to put in the chat box the link to the Mountain Crop Improvement Lab because the work that they're doing there is really fascinating. And I always like to promote the work that's happening at NC State.
Yeah.
Improvements on ornamentals and trying to reduce invasive qualities to some of our favorite landscape plants, as well as introductions for natives like the arborescence that Nancy was talking about.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about a few other hydrangeas that you may or may not know about. There is a hydrangea called Hydrangea serrata or mountain hydrangea. I've read that this is a subspecies of macrophylla. I don't know if that's correct or not, but it's similar to a macrophylla or bigleaf hydrangea. This particular one is called Fuji Waterfall, and it's a favorite of mine because it has these long bracts that dangle from the plant like earrings. It's lovely. I've had a really hard time getting it to flower in my garden because of lack of winter protection. So I put this one in a pot and I haul it into the garage and let it sit there over the winter so the flower buds don't get killed. It is a beautiful plant in flower. Another mountain hydrangea that I love is blue deckle, and I just love this powdery blue color. It has that dangling bract also around the fertile flower in the center. But this is another one that is tricky. I think this subspecies, serrata, can't take our late frosts. I think that's the problem. So if you want to go to the trouble, put it in a pot and bring it in to a garage that doesn't freeze. There's climbing hydrangea, Hydrangea anomala, subspecies petiolaris. This is a beautiful plant when it's in flower. It is an incredibly slow growing or slow to flower plant. You have to wait 3 to 5 years before you get your first flower, and it has to be sited just right. It is a vigorous vine, but getting the flower to come out is what really requires careful siting. It likes morning sun and afternoon shade and plenty of moisture. You see it here growing on a brick house, I think. I have grown this on my brick house and decided that I didn't want it on my brick house when I couldn't get it to flower. So I pulled it off and it leaves the aerial roots stuck to your brick. So do use caution when trying this. It sticks to whatever you grow it on with aerial roots, but it's beautiful. If you've seen one in flower, you'll know how pretty it is. Tricky though. There is another hydrangea called aspera, and it's rough leaf. The leaf is fuzzy and it has a lace cap flower with dangling bracts. It's pretty. This is probably the straight species. This one is called plum passion, and I've grown both of these in my garden. Rarely do they bloom. This one I tried just for the leaf color because I thought it was really interesting. This was discovered in China and introduced in the US by Dan Hinckley, who had Heronswood Nursery a million years ago. He's a crazy plant guy, but very entertaining. So plum passion, if you're really into trying unique and rare plants, I would look for this and try it. I would give it morning sun, afternoon shade, and a lot of water and see what it does for you. Those are just a few of the more rare hydrangeas or less common. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about designing with hydrangeas. When I choose plants for a design, I always start with cultural requirements. So I understand what my growing conditions are with sun, water, and exposure. That can be exposure to sun, wind. Is it a wet spot? Is it a particularly dry spot? So just really understand what your conditions are and then start choosing your hydrangeas. The other thing that I look at is it in a real visible place? Am I going to see it all year? Is it way back in a quiet part of the garden where I'll probably only be out there in the summertime? I won't look at it in the winter. If it needs to have a long season of interest, I'd probably choose an Oakleaf hydrangea because it really does have more to offer than a panicle hydrangea, which really is just grown for the flower show. Also, what effect are you going for, and some companion plants. If I'm working on a woodland garden and I want to use a hydrangea, I would use smooth hydrangea or native arborescens or Oakleaf hydrangea because they bloom in shade. The denser the shade, the more I will tend to go towards Oakleaf hydrangea because it really will bloom in dense shade. Smooth hydrangea gets a little more sparse the more shade it gets. Here you can see it in a woodland garden growing with astilbes and hostas and probably some sedges and ferns. The mophead hydrangeas are classic cottage garden plants. Here are 3 pictures of Bigleaf and probably Hydrangea arborescens growing off a porch. That's exactly where I put my mopheads. It does give a cottagey effect. And planted in mass is always lovely. This is a traditional mixed border, and here's Bigleaf hydrangea planted with catmint and hosta and lady's mantle growing down here at the edge. This is a garden that a hosta can grow successfully, so it's not a real sunny garden. It's got probably 4 hours of sun. The hosta doesn't scorch, but there's enough sun to get the hydrangeas to bloom. When you're choosing companion plants, the thing to consider is what else grows in the same amount of light and water requirement. I really like hydrangeas in contemporary gardens because they soften. Contemporary gardens tend to have a lot of linearity to them, a lot of straight lines, and the softness of this plant really lends itself to taking the hard edges off a contemporary garden. They're often used in very formal gardens. This picture is Bigleaf, and here you can see it's got purple and blue. That is controlled by the aluminum uptake, which is controlled by pH. It's probably close to 7 pH because you got pink and blue. This is probably Panicle hydrangea, a swimming pool in full sun. That seems like the right setting for that plant that can get floppier in the shade. This picture on the far right is a shadier sweep, and it's probably smooth hydrangea or arborescens. It can offer a very formal look in these situations, and I love it en masse. I think a mass of any kind of hydrangea can be very breathtaking when it's doing its thing. I love the picture on the left where we've got the blue chairs picking up the color of the blue hydrangeas. I think that's pretty sweet. Ida, Sackville West made the White Garden famous. Here is a picture I took at Biltmore, and they've done a border in white. I believe that is Annabelle hydrangea, which is a smooth hydrangea. The color is mirrored in this grassy plant called Arundodonax, and there's Lychnis, Rose Campion, and I believe this is a tall salvia. If you've been to the walled garden at Biltmore, you know that this is a sunny garden, and here we have Hydrangea arborescens in full flower and looking good in a full sun setting. They're probably offering supplemental water. Here, two different hydrangeas are being used in sort of an alley effect where it draws your eye down to the side gates. This one is more uniform and complete, and this one is more of a little bit of mixed border, but I like both those. Side gardens tend to be shadier because there might be shade from a neighboring house. So here we're using two different hydrangeas that can take more shade than Panicle. Bigleaf would probably work here too. A companion plant for any of these big floppy hydrangeas is something green in front of it, whether it's a grass or a clipped hedge or a loose shrub. Having something green in front of these plants offers it stability. So when the plant flops over, it's got something to lean on and it doesn't look quite so messy. It also hides the base of the plant, which can look ratty sometimes, especially as the growing season is coming to a close. This picture is in my garden. This is my little cottage arborescens planting, and I've got Hugendorn hollies planted in front of it. This is probably a boxwood hedge. Here's a smaller hydrangea growing with maybe a ornamental grass, maybe prairie dropseed or something like that, that's soft and flowing looking. So I like all three of these looks. That serves two purposes, gives the plant some structure and also hides its less attractive feature. And that's it. So here's my alley of Hydrangea tardiva, Panicle hydrangea. Any design questions?
We're talking about deadheading, hydrangea arborescens. They like to leave the flowers on for winter interest. I think you addressed this, but just to be clear about pruning just behind the spent flower in late winter, early spring.
When Hydrangea arborescens, cut that one down to 8 to 10 inches. If you want more woody structure to the stem, you can cut it down to 24 inches. It blooms on new wood, so you're never going to cut your flower heads off.
You talked about having hydrangeas in a pot and you put it in your garage for the winter. Do you need to water it throughout the winter at any time?
Good question. I have a whole garage full of plants, a couple of hydrangeas and lots of other things. If the plant is really sensitive to late frost, like the mountain hydrangeas that I talked about, the Fuji waterfall and blue deckle, then I'll haul them into the garage. Any of the plants that I put in the garage, I'll water every 10 days or 2 weeks. I don't drench them. I just give them enough to keep them going. As soon as I feel comfortable that the last frost has passed, I'll pull them out. Then they'll get rainfall or supplemental water from a hose if it's dry. But you can leave Panicle hydrangea or Hydrangea arborescens in a pot outside all year if the pot can take it. If it's got enough soil mass to keep the roots from freezing.
At the beginning, you talked about soil. Which one, if you have heavy clay, would you recommend starting with?
Well, probably arborescens because it's native to our clay soils. Everybody's got clay. and the clay is full of nutrients, but what it's not full of is air. So when I'm preparing a planting hole for a new shrub, I'll mix in pine fines, commonly sold as nature's helper. It's not really adding fertilizer to the soil, but it's creating air pockets in the soil, which helps plants get established.
Somebody asked about voles. I'm not exactly sure about vole damage because that can be situational. Have you ever encountered that?
Not with my hydrangeas, with lots of other plants. I mean,
Yeah.
they love our hostas.
Deer is another topic.
Yes, deer do eat hydrangeas. I don't have deer in my garden. I do a lot of gardens in which deer are present and munching with varying degrees of success. Spraying a deer repellent can work. Newly planted plants are more tender and supple and more appealing to deer than well-established plants. So I think giving it wire protection, if you've really got a deer problem and you can't put up a deer fence, putting a cage around it to at least let it establish will be helpful. But deer are going to eat anything they can get their little mouths on when they're hungry.
I think that's the key point. When other food sources are not available, then they're more likely to come in and feed. There's some information online about that. I think they're all pretty vulnerable.
I just looked at a landscape yesterday. The plant palette was chosen for deer resistance from lists by NC State and Rutgers University. And the deer are eating everything that is supposed to be highly deer resistant. It's because there's just not anything for them to eat right now.
What about fertilizing hydrangeas? When and how do you go about that?
I typically fertilize at the time of planting. I will put some fertilizer in the backfill. I like to see any kind of amendment being only 25% of the backfill so that the plant will move into the native soil successfully. Give 25% amendment with some fertilizer in it at the time of planting. Helps the plant establish, but you don't want it just growing in a little hole. You want to have 75% of your native soil in that backfill so it'll move out and establish a wide root base.
You mentioned earlier our clay soils are very nutrient rich. And so once a plant gets established, you really don't need to fertilize.
Unless there's a problem. If there is a problem, then I'll try and understand what the problem is and address it if it's a fertilizer or something else.
We have one more, and I think this is interesting because my husband talks about snowballs. This person, his grandmother called them snowballs, bloom in early spring, and the flowers drop off and the leaves remain. They've trimmed it back really hard, but it doesn't bloom well after that. Can you help us clear that up?
Well, there's another plant that is often referred to as a snowball, and it's a viburnum,
Right.
and that blooms in early spring. And so it may not be a hydrangea. The first thing to do is really identify what plant you're dealing with and then take it from there. Almost all viburnums bloom on old wood. So depending on when the plant is pruned, you could be cutting flowers off.
So the best thing to do is just not prune it, let it go, see what happens.
Absolutely. With Google lookup, you can identify plants really easily these days. So make sure you know what you're working with.
The number one step to pruning is what's your plant and what's your goal? Well, that's the end of our questions, Nancy.
Okay.
Thank you so much. This has been so informative. While we were doing your talk, I investigated some books, and Dr. Michael Durr has done quite a bit. There are a lot of books out there.
So this is Michael Durr's book. It is Hydrangeas for American Gardens, and it's a wonderful book if you really want to know all the nuts and bolts of hydrangeas. Hydrangea.com is a direct ship online grower, and they've got a lot of the common ones that you can direct ship or buy online and have it shipped to your house. Hydrangeas Plus is out of Oregon, and they have the more obscure. So if you want one of those Fuji waterfalls, you'll probably have to buy it at a place like Hydrangeas Plus. And I am putting in a little pitch for Hydrangea Society. They're in Atlanta and they have an annual garden tour. And this year it's on June 6th. And it's their 31st garden tour. If you're going to be in that area in early June, it'd probably be fun to go see if you're into hydrangeas.
Oh, yeah, that would be fabulous. I want to promote our North Carolina Extension Gardener Plant Toolbox. It's a good resource. This is volunteer-based information, and so it's constantly being added to and built on, but gives you some good basic information of the different species that Nancy talked about this morning. Anything else, Nancy, you want to share?
Happy gardening.
Happy gardening. Thank you again, Nancy, for joining us and everybody for coming today. Hope you have a great day and enjoy the coming of spring. Thank you, everybody.